In 1972, Fred Hart and his wife Marie purchased some farmland in the country. They moved from the town of Grafton, West Virginia, and together with their 4 children, they began farming. But eventually, they converted the farm into a campground that has hosted many campers from around the country. 2 of those campers were Dorothy and Leonard Collins. In May of 2003, their granddaughter, Hannah Collins, sat down with Fred and Marie to ask questions about a terrible accident that had happened the year before.
This place is absolutely beautiful, and it's so well kept, and it's just gorgeous. We love coming here. How did you come about having this?
Okay, we bought this old farm in 1972. It was grown up and nobody hadn't lived on it for 8 years. We got in the process of buying it, and a bunch of heirs showed up, which we was up to 1985 before we ever got it ourselves. We lived out here. We started out with no water in the house, outside plumbing, and the whole works. It was awful nice bringing 4 boys out of town out here. And we went into farming and raising cattle back in 1972. And after that, I began driving to school.
74 we moved to farm, right?
74 we moved to the farm, and then we 74 we moved to the farm, and then we started farming. I quit my job at construction work, and I ended up driving a school bus. And then I went into the sanitation business with porta potties and cleaning septic tanks. And that's the way we raised our family, with the farm and that. The next year after I was driving the school bus, Marie was a cook at the school. She transferred over to transportation department, and we was the first husband and wife team of driving here in this county. Back in 78 or 79, there's a revival going on to a local church out here. It was in the winter time, and I hadn't been going. Marie had been going every night. And she had a little accident out there at the church, and with a truck. So I started going to the revival. And then after going 3 or 4 nights, or 2 or 3 nights, I was here in the old farmhouse one night, and I woke up, and there's snow on the ground, and the moon, full moon out, a real light color. And I could hear music playing in that house. I got up and went around through the different parts of the house. I thought the boys had left the radio on. I got to the kitchen, looked out the back window over to the side of the meadow there, and I seen a bright light there on the meadow, and that's where Jesus talked to me that night. And I accepted the Lord right there. I got up and didn't tell Marie about it the next morning. We got ready to go to church that night. And I told her what I was going to do. I was going to go to the Lord.
Now I understand you have 4 sons and a daughter. Were any of them around at the time of this accident?
You know, there was none of my sons here at the time, and the daughter, she lives in the southern part of the state of Beckley, West Virginia. But I had one son, our youngest, Tom, who was working down the road there about a mile away. And I had Larry, our neighbor, to go get Tom. I asked Larry to go get Tom for me. And Larry took off with his truck and bring Tom back up.
Like any family, you've had tragedies in your lives that have impacted you severely. Would you tell me about your son, Paul?
Yes, the oldest son, Paul, he lived in the southern part of the state. He was turkey hunting on the first day of turkey season. He was shot with a .22 Magnum over the left ear, and the doctor said he was brain dead when he hit the ground. He had 3 sons, aged from 12 to 6. But he was a good Christian man, and God carried me through that ordeal, him and his wife, and his 3 children. And I told my grandson I lost my dad when I was 4, so I knew a little bit about what they were going through. But he, as I say, he was a wonderful Christian man, and I'd like to say his funeral was a revival instead of a funeral. There were 5 people saved at his funeral. So God is good.
Now you told us you had a heart attack, but from what I understand, you've gone through some other things as well.
My health problem started back in 1991, spring of 91, with prostate trouble, in which I got through that with the Lord's help, no cancer or anything. And then I was all right up to 1992. And I had a heart attack right here at the old farmhouse one Wednesday evening. Marie was just getting ready to go to prayer meeting that evening when I had the heart attack. she raced me right to the hospital, and, which they had to open up some arteries after that, and I was in good health up until 2001. I had sugar diabetes too, and when it got up to 2001, I had a stroke in April of that year, which paralyzed my left side, which is not there now. I can still use my left side very good. And then in July of 2001, I had a triple bypass with my heart. After I'd had the triple bypass, I couldn't do things like I used to do, and then I got depressed. I actually didn't want to live for a year there. I even quit taking all my medicine so I would die natural. I didn't want to commit suicide. I just didn't want to live anymore. I was a hard person to get along with on the thing. And that's before the accident came up here. Outside of that, until the accident, I've been pretty good health. And then in 1993, on January the 15th, at 11:08 a.m., our house caught on fire, and we lost everything we had, except our clothes on our back. I was in Morgantown that morning, and Marie had just left to make her bus run about 11 o'clock in the day. And she just got out the road, met her youngest son Tom coming in, and when he got here, the whole front of the house was on fire. We lost everything we had. And wanted for nothing. The Lord took over, and the neighbors, and the people from the church, and from all over, even out-of-state people, came here to work on this new house. 6 weeks later, we moved into a new house on our wedding anniversary. They come here after work of the evening and would lay blocks and stuff that way. And at that time, a year after I had a heart attack, and I wasn't able to do too much myself. But I got material in for them, and kept material here, and lights up on the work at night. And 6 weeks later, in January, the 1st of February, we had a brand new house to move into.
And 6 weeks later, we moved back into our new home on our wedding anniversary. And our church had us like a bridal shower. We had a 3-tier wedding cake and a big shower, and we got everything we needed for the new house. So, I mean, you know, in the wintertime, in 6 weeks from the time you lose a home and you're back in one, God is in control.
How long have you and Fred been married now?
We've been married 43 years.
And were you there when the accident happened?
No, I wasn't. Larry Ephraim, the man that stopped the tractor, came and got me and told me that Fred had been in an accident, but he was okay, and I needed to bring a pillow and a blanket. So we went down there, and he was laying on the ground. It was very scary, and the Lord sent one of my sisters from my Sunday school class. She came about that time. He knew I needed somebody. So her name's Carolyn Roy, and she was there. She gave me some comfort that day. Which I really needed.
Well, I started mowing that morning, and about 11 o'clock in the day, the tractor, my pants leg got hung up on the tractor, power takeoff lever. Instead of shutting the tractor off and stopping, I tried to stand up to get the leg off of it, and when I did, I run over a fire ring. And that threw me off the tractor. When I went down, I was holding on right in front of the wheel. When I turned it loose, the wheel drove me right underneath the tractor. It went over my chest the first time. The tractor made a large circle and come right back at me the second time, and I was laying there and couldn't do anything about it. And the tractor went over me the second time, right in the chest. I had a neighbor going down the road, him and his daughter, and they seen it happen. He ran over there and just almost got to me to pull me out of the way of it, but he didn't quite make it. And man, Buck and Sandra Newcomb was in their camp at the time, and she seen it happen. She came out the door on the telephone, called 911, and her husband run to me to help me.
And how bad did that hurt? Could you see that you were all cut up, or was it more you didn't know how badly you were hurt? What was that like?
When I fell off the tractor, my pants leg was hung on the PTO lever, and which the Lord had something to do with it. That pulled the mower out of gear. The mower was not running when it went over top of me. I did not have a mark on my body from the accident, outside marks, but I had 17 ribs, multiple fractured, breastbone broke, crushed, my heart bruised, both lungs collapsed, my neck was broken in one vertebrae, my left shoulder and right arm, forearm was broken. We had two campers there, Buck and Sandra Newcomb. She was a preacher. She's looking out the window and seen the accident happen. And when she came out of the camper, her husband followed her, she had the cell phone to call 911 for the emergency squad. And I have a neighbor, Larry Ephraim, was going down the road with him and his daughter. And they seen it happen, and they come running to me. And the Lord had help right there at the time to help me out. Larry got the tractor stopped before it come over me the third time, and his daughter came to me and sat down on the ground and held me up in her lap in an upright position so I could breathe, since my lungs are all messed up, collapsed. Which we didn't know that at the time. And I was bleeding very bad internally in my chest cavity. It took 12 minutes for the emergency squad and the fire department to get here. Town, 5 miles. It was here within 12 minutes. As soon as they examined me, seeing what it was, they raided over for a helicopter to come in and take me to the hospital. The helicopter landed just within 50 feet of me, and they put me in the helicopter, and 15 minutes later we was in Morgantown, West Virginia, 30 miles away.
My name's Tom. I was there shortly afterwards. I was working about a mile away, building a building for one of the neighbors, and they came by and got me, and I was there, 15 minutes maybe after it happened. Saw Dad lying here on the ground. I was really scared to see what, I was very apprehensive as to go, get run over by a tractor. You didn't know what you was going to see, especially with the mower on the back of it. I wasn't in a hurry to see what was going on, but he was laying there. You could tell he was hurt very badly. It wasn't any blood or any broken skin, but you could tell he was very mortally wounded, if you want to put it that way.
So a helicopter came and lifted you out of here. Now, how did they get you from the ground in the shape you were in to the helicopter, and do you remember any of this?
The emergency squad radioed for a helicopter to come from Morgantown. And that's the thing that the Lord had worked out to make that helicopter available at that time to be here in 15 minutes. And the emergency squad put me on a backboard and neck collar and put me in the ambulance and moved me about 100 feet to where the helicopter landed at. And I was awake all during this time, but I wouldn't open my eyes to see what was going on around me. I was afraid to open my eyes to see what shape I was in. And when they put me in the helicopter, the doctor came on the helicopter and examined me, and he had told one of the emergency squad men, had asked him a question about putting shock pants on me, and he said, there's no use to do that. He said, he won't be alive by the time we get into Morgantown, Ruby Hospital.
He said to us down here that day, boys, let me die. And when I helped carry the stretcher to put him on the helicopter, and one of the paramedics who was on the helicopter told me that he probably wouldn't make it to Morgantown.
I want to tell you, through all this, Fred never lost consciousness, and there was not one drop of blood on him. There was not one drop of blood on him. And we kissed him and told him we loved him when they loaded him in the helicopter before they took off with him, and he says, I love you back. So, God is good.
Okay, now tell us what happened at the hospital, and do you in fact remember any of that?
Okay, Hannah, we arrived at the hospital. I was awake in the helicopter all the time. The doctor in the helicopter had put an IV in my left arm, which was broken. And he kept me talking to keep me awake. And when they landed on the roof, a lady come out, Mrs. Hersey, she's in town here, the nurse, brought a gurney out of the elevator right on the roof. They transferred me over to it, and a doctor come out of the elevator about then and took a needle and gave me a shot in that IV in my arm. And they put me in the elevator. I seen Mrs. Hershey pushed the buttons. I never did see the door come shut. I didn't see anything for 2 weeks after that. And at that time, I was completely out of it. I was tied in bed, my feet and hands, with all kind of tubes and wires into me and stuff, things like that. And the doctors didn't expect me to live, so they didn't bother to set my arm. They didn't bother to set my neck, only neck collar on there. They couldn't do anything about the ribs, so I just left one person to heal those ribs, and that was the Lord went there and healed the ribs and healed that broken arm.
Okay, Marie. Now, he obviously wasn't with it at the time, and you had to have been worried. So what was your take with all the doctors and all the visitors, with everything going on? How were you doing?
Well, I mean, it was very hard to go in and see him with all these needles and IVs and things. He even had something in his neck. And it was very hard because he was not responding to anything. And I was there every day, and so were the boys for the first week. And he never showed any sign of, getting any better. And I had talked to some of these doctors. He had about 6 different doctors that was taking care of him. He had, of course, he was on a respirator. They had, someone to take care of that. And then his main doctor asked me, he said he's got something wrong in his head. There's something wrong, and I can't put my finger on it. And I said, well, I can tell you that he doesn't want to live. And he says, that's what I needed to know. And he started him on an antidepressant drug, and he started responding a little more after about 2 weeks when it took hold.
Mr. Hart, during your stay at the hospital, you had an experience that can only be described as amazing. Would you tell us about that?
All right, when I was in the hospital and I was unconscious or out of it, my spirit left my body and came back home here to Heartland, Lake Marie. When the spirit left my body, there was a bright red door on the right. The red was so bright that you had to shut your eyes, it blinded you. And the kind of on the left was a soft white light. It was inviting. So I went the way the soft white light, and I ended up coming back home here. I sat around picnic tables and stuff around the campground here for about 3 days. I couldn't imagine why Marie was never home. Of course, she was up at the hospital with me at the time. But my spirit was out of the body. I just remembered everything in detail. Coming back home here and staying for about 3 days.
Could you give me some more specifics about that red door you described and the bright light? Do you have any insight on what that might have been?
When my spirit left my body, there was a bright red door on the right-hand side of me. And it was so bright that you had to shut your eyes. It would blind you. And it was warm, too. And on the left was a door with a soft light, inviting light to come to, for you to come to. And that bright red was so hot and nasty, bright, that I didn't actually want to look at it. So I went to the soft white light and went that way there. And I kind of always thought, I didn't think at the time till afterwards, but that red door might have been the sign of heading towards hell or to the devil's side.
Now, what did you see and what did you do around here when your spirit was out of your body?
When I was here, I just sat around the different picnic tables. Everything was quiet and peaceful here. And there was some of the campers in, and some of them. I remember the first night I was here, I had 2 step-granddaughters. They had a friend with them, came walking down from their house and walked right by me. I tried to kid them and joke with them, but they ignored me. They paid no attention to me. And I realized after they couldn't see me or they couldn't hear me. And so I just kept moving around. I couldn't understand why Marie, my wife, was not here. Of course, she was back at the hospital. I just sat around different places. People didn't realize that I was even here watching. When I was sitting over there at the pond one evening, I seen Bob Clausen walk by me. I spoke to him. He ignored me. He came over and got a bag of ice and went back to his camper. And then later on, I was sitting at this picnic table over here, and I seen a fellow come in to feast. And he come come over and knocked on the door there, and there wasn't nobody answer here, nobody answered. And I knew it was no use for me to go to him because he couldn't hear me or couldn't see me. I watched him take his money out and lay down on that bench right there and set a pop bottle or a pop can on top of it. And then he went ahead feasting that evening. So I sat around with him while he was feasting several times. Another time I waited on Buck and Sandra Newcomb to come home one evening. It's getting pretty late. They had a dog in their camper. When he comes, she took the dog out for a walk. About 11 o'clock at night. When she come back out of the camper, there's 3 or 4 deer there on the ground there to the pavilion. And the dog scared them deer off. When they ran off, was kind of scared Sandra at the time. But she never realized that I was there.
Now, Fred, tell me about your little dog here.
The day that I got hurt, the day of the accident, Peanuts, the dog, she came to me when I was laying there waiting on a helicopter and licked me in the face, but she never did do that before. And after, she even tried to chase the helicopter after they loaded me into it. And the neighbors down there, Buck and Sandra, said from the camper that she came back down there that afternoon and sniffed out the spot that I was laying and laid down in it that afternoon. And then she had the sensation, and I had the sensation that she was here with me when I would be back sitting around the picnic tables or the pavilion around the lake here. She'd be laying right on my feet. I could feel the warmth from her, the dog, on my feet. She sensed that I was back here.
Another thing about the dog, she knew Fred was gone, and every time I come home, she just sensed that he wasn't with me. So when I brought his pajamas home to wash them, I let her smell them to let her know that he was still around, and that seemed to make her happy.
When you left the farm and you went back to the hospital and back into your body, did you know right away that you were back in your body, or how was that like?
Going back, I remember going by the door, coming out of the white door and going by that bright red door and going back into my body. And then I realized that I was hurt and I was tied down. My hands were tied, my feet were tied, and I had tubes and everything in me. The nurses would come by and tell me not to do this, not to pull on that, not to move my head because my neck was broken. But I actually didn't realize how bad I was at that point. I didn't fully begin to wake up or come out of being in the dream or being under. But, I never did come back to the house again after I went back, was tied back in the bed. I never came back to the farm anymore. I never did go back to any past in my life. The things that happened in the past a lot of times. I never had that experience. It was always coming back here to the lake and the campground.
Well, when Fred was in the comatose state, we got really discouraged, the boys and I, the family, and we had talked amongst ourselves, and with the doctors after 2 weeks because the machine was keeping him alive. He couldn't breathe on his own, and the machine was keeping him alive, and we didn't really think he wanted to live that way.
That was a difficult time. Of course, we went to Morgantown that morning with intent of taking him off life support because he wasn't showing any signs of improvement. And it was, we knew that it was against his wish to be in such a condition.
I'd say about 13 days. On the 13th day, I was at the hospital, and this man, he came, I don't know what his name was, but he brought this big harp, and he'd come and play on different floors of the hospital. And he played the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. And right then, God assured me that whatever happened, it was going to be okay. Whether he stayed or where he went home, it was going to be okay. But the next morning, we went in and we talked to the doctors. We just told them what we had, we talked about, and we talked to the doctors and talked to the family, and they talked to us. And I just told them, I said, well, you've had your say, I've had my say, but God has the last say.
So we went in and to physically ask Dad if that's what he wanted done. And he indicated to us that no, he didn't want that. He understood what was going on, And we explained to him what he would have to go through, and he understood that, and he was perfectly fine with it. And of course, there was a registered nurse that didn't believe it. She had to come in and had to see it all for herself, and she asked him questions, and he was actually joking around with her, you know, not being able to speak with tubes and so on, but it still got the point across.
So we all went into Fred's room. Now, he never opened his eyes, never recognized any of us, never even knew we'd been there for 2 weeks. So we walked in, and he had his eyes wide open. The nurse started asking him questions if he knew where he was at, and everything like that, and he'd shake his head yes or no. And as I said, I have a twin sister, and she was with me. And her husband and Fred always kidded about having 2 wives. So the nurse asked Fred if he was married, and he shook his head no. And she said, "Are you married?" And he said, do you have 2 wives? And he shook his head yes. And tell me my God don't have a sense of humor. And we all laughed, and from that day on, he started improving every day.
I remember when they come in there and I had my eyes open there. And I remember them asking those questions. I remember Marie, my wife, being there. I could know Tommy, my youngest son, was there in the room, and Jim, my oldest son, was there in the room too. And Tommy was having a heck of a time. He didn't want me to die. He didn't want the doctors to disconnect the machines. And Tommy, I think somebody said or told me later that he said, "Let Dad make a decision what he wants." Well, he wrote down on a piece of paper they wanted to quit suffering and disconnect the machines, let me go on. And also the second option was to put a trach in my neck, and I would breathe on oxygen through my neck the rest of my life. Well, realizing that the boys still want me around, I thought, well, I can put up with carrying an oxygen bottle around. And of course, I couldn't talk back to them, and Tommy read over what he'd written on the paper, and I pointed to the one that I wanted to live on oxygen in the trach. And from that minute on, the Lord realized and heard me say it, I wanted to live, and I started getting better that day on. And a week or so later, one day they took me to X-ray. Wheeled the bed and all, they put an oxygen tank on the bed. I got down there, and the time they got the X-rays done, the nurse called for transportation to take me back to my room, and she had told him, said he's about out of oxygen, bring a spare tank. Well, the aide didn't bring a tank of oxygen, and I run out that day. They had a signal on me if my oxygen level fell below 90, that would ring a bell or a buzzer. And my oxygen, I breathing on my own, kept the oxygen up without alarming. So then the next night or so, the doctors at 1 o'clock in the morning decided to disconnect the oxygen, let me breathe on my own. And I was afraid to, because they want me to be asleep where I breathe easy, but I was afraid to go to sleep, and I fought it to stay awake. I got through that 2 hours, the next night was more hours. So finally it come up 24 hours, and they took the oxygen out of the room, took the trach out of my neck, sewed my neck back up. And I haven't had a breath of oxygen since then.
Now, Fred and Marie, this has been an amazing journey. How has this changed your outlook on life now and on life in the hereafter?
Well, the only thing I can say is my God is in control, and he knows what's best for us, and he's brought us through too much. He gave us a house that in 6 weeks we had a new home, and when we lost everything we had, look what we got back in return. So God is good, and he returns much more than you lose, and I just thank him very much. I love him.
It gave me a completely different lookout on life. Before, I was always taught and always worked hard all my life, and then after I had the heart bypass and got depressed, I couldn't do things as normal. But now, those things don't bother me anymore. They just pass every day. If I don't feel like doing it, I don't do it. And it's amazing. It doesn't bother me, it doesn't worry me. I cannot do things like I used to do when I was younger all the time. And it's also a view there that I've got a place to go when the time finally comes. Instead of going through that red door, I'll be going through the white door.
You know, my God still is the same God he was 2,000 years ago. He can heal the sick, make the blind to see, and make the dumb talk. Because the day Fred come back to us, we went back into the room, was talking to the doctor, was going to talk to doctors more, and my youngest son Tommy said, you know, we have just seen a miracle, and God still is performing miracles today. Just look at Fred.
You know, with falling off of a tractor and the chances of his pant leg catching that PTO lever to kick the mower out of gear so that when it went over top of him, it didn't chop him up. But to be run over twice, you know, not expected to make it to Morgantown and did. And then, you know, the first couple of days you come in, the doctors are kind of scratching their heads because they're really surprised that he's still there.
This smile.
I'm known as a miracle man now. And everybody says it's been a miracle that you're still alive. Being 70 years old and go through what I went through. It's a scary thing is when you're laying on the ground, you can't move. You look up and see that red tractor coming right to you and them big wheels coming right at you. With nobody on the tractor. No way to get it stopped and no way to get out of the way of it. Just let it come at me. When my pants leg was hung on this lever, and I stood up to get it off. I couldn't get my foot up to get on the clutch to stop the tractor, and instead of pulling the stop and letting it stop itself, I stood up, and that's when I run over a fire ring and jarred me off the tractor. I fell down, and my pants leg was hooked on that lever, which pulled it out of gear, pulled the mower out of gear, and that's what saved me from being cut up. I made a circle after going over me the first time on the chest. Made a circle and come right back to me the second time. I was laying down and watching it come at me and I couldn't move. It come right astraddle of me. I went between the front wheels and one back wheel went over me the second time, and the mower caught my arm right here as it went over the second time. The mower went over my arm. It's the fire ring that I run over the day of the accident. The only difference is there was no food on it, no hamburgers at that time.
Jesus said that in this world you shall have tribulation. Fred and Marie Hart have certainly had their share of tribulation. They have experienced other tragedies that were not discussed here. We always think of death as the worst tragedy, but the Scripture says that it is appointed unto every man once to die, and after that the judgment. Fred Hart was not afraid to die, because he knew that Jesus had received his judgment for him. On April the 17th, 2007, Fred Hart left his body for the final time to be forever with Jesus.